I was quite cross with the royal household because they did have the responsibility of maintaining the properties, as the owner-occupiers do, as we do. You always have to put a little bit of money aside in case something goes wrong with the roof or the boiler or that's part of the way any owner-occupier lives their lives. And what we found when we looked at this was not only had they not put money aside, but they had they had no savings at all. They didn't have any money set aside for an emergency. That's why the 370 million pounds was put in. I think that was not very good management, not by the royal family themselves, but by the royal household of that sovereign grant.
Let's turn to the royal family, because King Charles has become the first monarch in British history to release his tax payments. And they show that His Majesty was amongst the UK's top 100 taxpayers in 24 to 25, paying almost £13 million for the period, as well as over £11 million back in 2023 to 2024. The accounts also reveal that the monarchy's core funding will double within 3 years, rising to £100 million by 2027 to 2028. It's also been revealed that Charles and Camilla will not live at Buckingham Palace when this £369 million refurbishment are going to be completed next year. Now, the palace will continue to be what's known as the kind of administrative HQ of the monarchy, but the King has decided to live nearby in Clarence House, which will remain his official home. Well, let's now speak with Baroness Hodge, Margaret Hodge, the Labour peer and former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, who's sort of always had quite a beady eye on these issues. Margaret, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ayesha. And they should be using you to help them.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy here broadcasting to my lovely listeners. But look, Margaret, you're always somebody who has campaigned for more transparency with regards to the royal family's finances. Are you pleased that the King has now released these his tax affairs? And what do you learn? What are your big takeaways?
To be honest, I'm disappointed. When at the beginning of the week, the King said that he was going to release his tax affairs, I thought, at last, the monarchy is taking seriously what I've been saying for a long time, that if they are to survive in the modern world, they have to modernise. And that involves much greater transparency and accountability, not for their own personal private money, but for the money that comes in one way or other through the taxpayer. And I think I haven't a clue after today's announcement, which is just an amount of tax that is paid, what that relates to. So I am disappointed. Would it be helpful, Ayesha, if I go through it? Because there are various sort of pockets of money. So let's start with the sovereign grant. That worries me a lot.
And just explain what that is.
The sovereign grant is money that comes directly from the taxpayer to fund the royal family for carrying out their royal duties. And it's quite right that the taxpayer should foot that bill. Some years ago, in 2017, it emerged that the royal household had not been looking after Buckingham Palace properly. So a massive amount was allocated above the traditional amount of the sovereign grant to help just repair Buckingham Palace and make it fit for the family to live in. £370 million has been spent over the last 10 years on Buckingham Palace. So I'm disappointed really that at the end of that massive investment from public money, we now learn that the King does not want to live there. It was made comfortable for the monarch, and he now doesn't want to live there. There are, of course, other ways that it can be open to the public, and look forward to that. But £370, some of which was to keep the infrastructure going, the rest of it was to make it comfortable for the monarch.
To be honest, Margaret, they were probably just paid for like a bathroom renovation and a loft extension. The way everything's so expensive these days. But I take your point. Carry on.
Well, no, I think so. Then that we hear this morning that the sovereign grant is going to then become £100 million. Well, that's almost double what it was in 24-25. So it's a massive extra amount of money that is going into the sovereign grant, which concerns me at a time when families are struggling to make ends meet, meeting big heating bills and having to deal with cost of living and inflation crisis.
And the country hasn't funded its defence plan properly.
Absolutely. So my first worry is about that. I don't see a justification for that massive increase in the basic sovereign grant. And I'll just say to you, we interviewed the royal household on the sovereign grant some years ago, and I wish the Public Accounts Committee would do the job again properly. But what we found was there was some mismanagement at that day, because the sovereign grant doesn't just cover the day-to-day expenses of staff and food and everything else. It is supposed to also cover the cost of maintaining the infrastructure, the house at Buckingham Palace and Prince Albert's Memorial and other parts of the estate that are part of there. So to argue, as they have this morning, that they need it for capital investment elsewhere is not an argument that I hold clearly to. So that's the first thing. That's just the sovereign grant. We then move to, they get money from two duchies, the Duchy of Cornwall and the Duchy of Lancaster. These two duchies were established by Edward III in the 1330s as a sovereign grant. It was precisely to support the royal family in maintaining their royal duties. So I think they are public money. I've always had an argument with the royal family on that. They claim it to be private. But the income that came out of those two duchies last year was another £50 million between the two duchies. This year, it's probably around about the same. And again, not only are they, if they're private, they should be paying taxes. If they're public, they might be tax exempt, but you would then add them to the other income that they get and say, Are we giving the royal family the right amount of money?
Okay. Well, look, Margaret, you've obviously studied this very closely, and you've made some very compelling points. Other people will disagree. I mean, Ed Vaizey at the beginning of his show did a monologue saying, I know people will sort of moan about the royal family, but actually they are good value for money because they bring in so many tourists. They bring in, huge amounts of revenue for the country in terms of tourism and people coming to the country. They're incredibly important to our soft power. That's still one of the things that makes Britain very special in the world. What would you say to those people who say, look, I get there's a cost of living crisis, but I actually think they're good bang for buck?
I completely agree with Ed Vaizey. I think that this is in no way arguing against the royal family. Indeed, what I would say is if we don't have proper transparency and accountability and assurance that actually our taxpayers' money is being properly spent, I think in the modern world, they lose some of their reputation and some of their credibility. And I don't want that to happen. We then, you can move on. We had the Crown Estate. We had the report on the Crown Estate. So that's another source of income for the royal family. The Crown Estate was set up to provide value and income to the taxpayer. But we found in that report that there were a whole lot of people who were getting homes at peppercorn rents, including some non-working royals. And but worse still, we found that cottages attached to some of these glorious big houses that they inhabit, they were renting them out and making further income from that.
Okay.
That income should be going to the taxpayer to fund public services. I could go on, Ayesha.
Sure.
Do you want me to say a little bit more?
I'm just conscious of time, Margaret. We've got a couple of messages coming in because I think a lot of people are really interested in this topic. Two people, Phil and Chris, have just messaged in with a similar point. Phil says MPs haven't been looking after the Palace of Westminster either. There's a difference between maintaining costs and then updating and major repairs. And he says, why not give these properties back to the full Crown Estate and then cease public funds? Otherwise, the deal done centuries ago was for the public purse to pay for their running costs. And Chris says, should all the sovereign estate be taken back under the wings of the government estate and remove responsibility and funding for the royal family? What do you think of that idea?
I don't think it's such a bad idea. I think that might be one way forward. When we looked at this, I was quite cross with the royal household because they did have the responsibility of maintaining the properties, as the owner-occupiers do, as we do. You always have to put a little bit of money aside in case something goes wrong with the roof or the boiler or something. That's part of the way any owner-occupier lives their lives. And what we found when we looked at this was not only had they not put money aside, but they had they had no savings at all. They didn't have any money set aside for an emergency. That's why the 370 million pounds was put in. I think that was not very good management, not by the royal family themselves, but by the royal household of that sovereign grant. But I don't disagree with that idea. That might be one way forward.
Yeah, I think they should have had a sinking fund, shouldn't they? That's what, as you say, that's what other people.
Something. I always think, God, I'm going to have to. I've just got to put money aside. Something's bound to go wrong, and something always does. My washing machine's broken down this morning. I wasn't expecting that. I'm going to have to do something about that as well. And that's a typical day in any family in Britain.
Right. Now, Yolanda has messaged in saying the King should stop charging NHS rent. This was a story from a while back. Staff pay might improve and ridiculous parking charges would help proletariats like what I am to visit sick people without the cost. Do you remember that story, Margaret? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to turn to, Ayesha, is because there's so lack of transparency. We don't know, except we get through leaks, and it's been leaks like the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers. We don't know how the Duchy of Cornwall, the Duchy of Lancaster are managed. Although I do know that the King, when he was Prince, did actually sit and chair every board meeting of the Duchy of Cornwall. And there are worrying things there. There's a big warehouse somewhere that houses a whole load of ambulances, and all that money from that income goes now to the Duchy of Cornwall. There's a huge building next to one of our MI5, MI6, I never remember which one. It's let out to voluntary organisations, and many of those voluntary organisations have somebody in the royal family as their patron. So the patron helps to raise money that then goes in expensive rent for premises that the royal family have. And I think the worst story I came across was Dartmoor Prison, which has not been inhabited for a few years because of it's unfit for human. It's literally unfit for human habitation. But MOJ, the Ministry of Justice, still pay £1.5 million a year in rent to the Duchy of Cornwall. Now, today, they have said they're going to use that money for people who live around Dartmoor, but all of whom lost their jobs a few years ago anyway. My view on that is they just shouldn't be taking it from the Ministry of Justice. We've got enough delays in our courts. We've got enough problems in our prison, and that £1.5 million could be just a little bit to help us sort out the inheritance we got in delay in getting justice and in the appalling conditions for our prisoners.
Well, look, Margaret, it's a really interesting conversation, and I think you've shone a light on, and I think we can all agree that the royal family are a really good thing for this country, and at the same time also say that it is important to shine a light on the financial affairs and transparency and look at where all the different revenue streams are coming in from. I think that's very important. Thank you very much for your time. That's Margaret Hodge, Baroness Hodge, Labour peer and former chair of the Public Accounts Committee. Martin messages in saying all this fuss about the sovereign grant and palace renovations. The landmark buildings need to be renovated. They can't be allowed to collapse. Divide the sums amongst the UK population, and it's about the price of a Mars bar each year. Yes, it is. The next thing, of course, which will be back in the public scrutiny, as Phil mentioned it earlier, is the Palace of Westminster. That is teetering. When I'm actually yet to sort of do this, I'm going to go on a tour. They're going to take me on a tour, and people of sort of some of the basement bits of Parliament, because apparently it's just like an absolute fire hazard because it's such an old building, and there's been this kind of thicket of sort of wires and electrical circuits that have sprung up over the years. It's always just like a botched job, one on top of the other, and at some point parliamentarians, including myself, are going to have to bite the bullet and decide what to do. But there will be an absolute stooshy over the amount that will cost to renovate, and I wonder how people will feel about that. Do you think that these historic buildings like Buckingham Palace and the Palace of Westminster, should they have the full the full shebang in terms of, whiskering them up to make them, beautiful again in these important working historic buildings? Or do you think everyone's going to have to tighten their belt in these very difficult fiscal times?